As the night closes in and the last of the reddening sun drops below the horizon, there is only the slightest moment of peace in the jungles of Indonesia. Even when the day is drawing to a close and the hustle and bustle is quieting down, as soon as the darkness is fully there, it is replaced by the sounds of the night. Most of them are quieter and less jarring, that's for sure, but there is one in particular that would stand out above the normal sounds of your life that you might expect. It probably wouldn't matter if you were a local who lived on Java your whole life, or a tourist who was just passing through. A shriek of the Ahool breaking through the night would grab your attention either way. And if you look to someone local for some sort of explanation, it is unlikely that they will tell you anything that would be of any comfort, because that is apparently simply the call of the legendary Ahool, a creature that is some sort of ungodly combination of an ape and a bat. Something that is 10 feet tall and has a wingspan of 28 feet, and something that, for even the most ardent skeptic, it might seem sensible to try and avoid. Tales of flying beasts that rule the skies above us are far from rare. When we look back even a little through our history, we can think of the obvious candidates, like the pterosaur or the pterodactyl that flew high above the earth millions of years ago. In fact, it's kind of known that, according to the theory of evolution, some of our ancestors used to get picked up by giant eagles, which, I guess we were right at the time to fear the sky, but now, humanity owns the sky, so it is what it is. But despite what some might think, they didn't exist in the same time frame as humans at any point in time, but it's hard to imagine seeing something that big taking flight. In a similar way to the titans of the deep, both real and possibly cryptid in nature, these seem to capture our imaginations in a special way. The same is true for anything that roams above. After all, if we as a species have established almost perfect dominance over the land, it is probably natural that whatever we fear the most and understand the least would exist in these realms that we couldn't fully control. That is, until we created the F-35. In our modern age, one of the largest birds is the California condor with a wingspan of nearly 10 feet. While they initially had been extinct in the wild since the late 1980s, given that they still survive due to capture, breeding, and reintroduction, it is fair to see the effect that these massive beasts would have on people. And, as well as these accepted and verified creatures, both current and prior, we also need to consider these that exist on the fringes of accepted science. Things like the so-called thunderbird that is depicted in folklore and traditions of many indigenous American tribes. These were said to be so large that the flapping of their wings were enough to create thunder and lightning that preceded it, which was flashed from its eyes. The size of these birds was never agreed upon, but agreed to be beyond what anything known to science could approach, and they were treated with the appropriate level of reverence by those that considered them to be an integral part of their culture. And similar stories with improbably large birds that controlled the weather or influenced events on Earth were common even further afield. All of this is just to point out that we as a people have often looked to the skies and seen or believed we have seen creatures flying above us that are beyond what we really would have known to have been proven from time immemorial. But what we are looking at today might share some of the same characteristics and travel in the same way, but it has some distinctions that are very specific to it. And to understand the tale of the Ahool better, we need to head to the island of Java in Indonesia to see what it really is all about. Java is one of the largest islands in the world with more than 150 million people residing on it, more than half of Indonesia's total population. It is home to Jakarta, the Indonesian capital, and is around 132,000 square kilometers or 50,000 square miles in size. Also, I just want to point out, continents are basically just giant islands, I've always thought. Does that sound stupid? No, it doesn't, because they're surrounded by water. But this means that as of the last calculation in 2024, there are around 1,164 people in every square kilometer, or over around 3,000 people in every square mile, which is known as the Lord's units. Kilometers obviously being heathen. So while its original formation was due to volcanic activity, there are still more than 100 volcanoes on the island at the time of writing, with more than 30 of them still being classed as active. Its unique location and makeup have made it a historical and current hive of all living things with an impressive level of biodiversity. Due to its extensive rainforest, it has been the location for a number of species that existed only there and nowhere else, with specifically Javan species of rhino, gibbon, leopard, and various plants and birds that have all existed at one point, or still do to this day, on the island and nowhere else. However, interference with the natural habitat of these animals have led to some of these bespoke species, like the Javan elephant and the Javan tiger, to become extinct. This is all to say that if there was to be something unique, unusual, and undiscovered by the outside world, then it would be a fair guess that it may be happening in Java. And this is why when tales began to emerge of something seemingly very unlikely out of the deepest parts of the rainforest that was just hanging out there may have been the usual expected skepticism, but there was at least some consideration given to the fact that it may have been the truth. While there were certainly some pre-existing local legends, one of the first reports of a strange encounter came from the year 1925, courtesy of a naturalist named Dr. Ernest Bartels. He would be in the shadow of the Salic Mountains when he reported that an enormous bat-like creature far bigger than any he had encountered before was spotted. It should be noted here that while the good doctor had his own stellar credentials, his father was a noted ornithologist, and as such, he would have been intimately familiar with the physical size, look, and behavior of any known birds in that area. He would also note down what he saw, and the details of it would fade into the background somewhat until he had his second encounter with a similar creature in 1927, 2 years later. This time, it would not be long before midnight when the onomatopoeic call of the creature would cause him to get out of his bed. The cry of the Ahool brought Dr. Bartels running from his hut where he was sleeping, but all he saw was the ever-disappearing outline of the famed beast and a final, still clear cry of Ahool as it departed. The records that he kept and the reports that he gave concerning what he had seen tied in with what some of the local tribespeople told him, that this was a creature known to live in the area and one that was treated with the utmost caution by them. And for a little while anyway, the tale of the Ahool would continue in relative obscurity. But there would be at least one man, Ivan Sanderson, who would then hear the story and soon have one of his very own that had a lot of similarities. When we come to look at similar cryptids or any other unexplained encounters that might have the same characteristics with something as bizarre and seemingly unlikely as the Ahool, we have to kind of understand what stands alone and what doesn't. Surely we'd be limited to looking at other large-scale cryptids that have been reported in remote areas with nothing much else in common. While that is certainly the case, and anyone looking to research massive unknown creatures in remote locations would do well to kind of look at some of the suggestions at the end of this segment, there is in fact at least one creature that seems to share some key characteristics with the Ahool. We need to very briefly consider one of nature's horrors, the Alisio, another enormous cryptid with bat-like descriptions in its sightings. For this creature, we need to look to Cambodia, where it was first reported in the year 1937, and despite widespread skepticism and a lack of hard proof, tales of it have persisted since. Reasons for the name Alisio are split, with some claiming it's from a native term for the beast and others claiming it was from a mistranslation when one of the first prominent observers attempted to decant his observations to the local tribes. In 1937, report of an encounter with the creature was actually based on a sighting in 1932 by two men named Ivan Sanderson and Gerard Russell, who were on an expedition into West Africa and happened to spy the animal briefly. Sanderson would then report the encounter in 1937 with the published book called Animal Treasure about his travels. Here is how he describes what happened after he and his companion had entered the river briefly to retrieve a bat that they had shot. Coming straight at me only a few feet above the water was a black thing the size of an eagle. I had only a glimpse of its face, yet it was quite sufficient, for its lower jaw hung open and bore a semicircle of pointed white teeth set about with their own width apart from each other. Both Sanderson and Russell were considered adept and experienced explorers at the time with a wealth of knowledge under their belts, and were both unlikely to just straight up lie about something as random and unlikely as this encounter. The two men would return to camp following this incident, and when they described it to the local hunters, the tribesmen would seem to recognize some aspect of the creature that they were describing. Both men would compare notes nearly 40 years later and find that their recollection of the events were almost identical. Again, we'll see what Ivan Sanderson wrote, this time in 1972, with a book titled Unexplained. About 15 feet away and just above the level of my eyes, it was coming straight at me awfully fast, so I ducked down into the water. I got a very good and close look at its face, and to put it facetiously, that weren't no bird. Its lower jaw hung down, and as the light of the sun was directly shining onto its face, I could have counted the huge white teeth if I had the time. They were a good 2 inches long, all about the same length, and all equally separated by spaces the same width. This animal that flew at me had a muzzle more like that of a monkey than of a dog or any kind of reptile, in that it was not drawn out to a point. The whole animal was coal black in color, including the wings, which were quite opaque. It did not appear to be hairy, but then neither do most bats until you examine them in your hand. Recovering my gun, I swung around and called to Gerald to watch out for it to come back, and a short time later, it did so. But in those few minutes, the last rays of sun had moved up, and there was a deep shadow over the river. We both blazed away with both our barrels, but the great creature just sailed right over us, uninterrupted and making a shishing noise. So fast was it going, in fact, its speed of flight was much greater than we had estimated, and this speed may have been the reason we missed it. Though Gerald is deadly at snapshots, and it was most on top of us, I have often wondered if we did hit it, but that our shot, which was for collecting small animals, just failed to penetrate its hide. Alternatively, we may have simply just blasted holes through its vast wing membranes. We made haste back to our camp about a mile upstream. While there might be some that are skeptical of various aspects of this recollection, be it 40 years after the fact and, the alleged agreed upon accounts, or maybe it's just the implausibility of it combined with the inclusion in a book specifically called Unexplained, then rest assured that we are right there with you. I mean, it's okay to be skeptical. However, 40 years is a long time to keep up a false story, especially collaborated on by two people. And while the allure to sell copies may contribute to the motivation to exaggerate, it should be noted that the rest of his career and the accomplishments of the two men involved, it's really not in dispute at all. They were both bona fide explorers and men who accurately and correctly reported all of their journeys and travels with little to no disagreement. Given the in-depth and detailed nature of the description of this similar cryptid, it hardly seems worth mentioning others, as they would pale in comparison. But just for those who want to have too many tabs open in their browser, consider the following for some light reading. Within the same country, you could actually look into the orang bati, a human bat hybrid that haunts the volcano of the island of Seram in Indonesia, or even the African Kogamato found in Madagascar. But when it comes to explanations for what the Ahool might have been, or is, I guess, and how we can rationalize and explain it, as ever, there are multiple avenues open to us. The first is the easiest to assess, and that is that these are legitimate reports of a creature that does not match anything that we currently know about. And if there was ever going to be a creature as substantial and bizarre as the Ahool, where better to find it existing than the far reaches of Java? Some, when looking into the accounts, point out that after his second encounter with the Ahool, Dr. Patel's himself floated the suggestion that it may have just been some sort of large owl that he had seen and heard. Again, it is worth noting both his own status as an esteemed naturalist and his father's prior expertise as an ornithologist. If a man of this caliber and knowledge suggests that it may have been some form of misidentification, then surely that is possible. After all, even the most thorough researcher in the world is hardly likely to have seen or heard literally every bird and bat that is ever going to exist. And there is something to be said about how clear and clinical someone's mental recall and observation skills are likely to be when they are roused from their half sleep around midnight. Basically what I'm saying is misidentifications can happen because of the physical status of your meat suit. When considering the encounters and the reactions of some of the native tribes people, there are some that suggest that the Ahool is a member of some surviving species of something at least similar to the pterosaur. And while it might be easy to point out that there are at least tens of millions of years that have passed since the last known pterosaur ruled the skies, it is certainly a suggestion that is worth considering. After all, Java has proven itself as a uniquely suited place to allow species to survive, thrive, and exist within its confines, even when there is nowhere else on Earth that these animals are found. So for those that want to believe this sort of suggestion, the pieces seem to fall into place fairly well. The location is unique and remote. The local people are aware of its existence while the rest of the world is not, and the encounters are extremely rare. Some of the descriptions from the local tribes describe the Ahool as less of a bat, but more of a flying primate, which is crazy. Not crazy because they're describing it, that would go pretty hard. A truly terrifying proposition no matter which way you cut it. Some of the descriptions given, enshrined in local legend and tradition, imply that the Ahool was nothing less than a primate with wings that swooped down and took away whatever it wanted to feed on. Others try to straddle the fence a little more to hedge their bets, and the way they do this is by taking the stories at face value but providing a slightly more conventional explanation. What they suggested is that there's no doubt there's something unusual in Java, that there was similarly something unusual in Cambodia, and that the testimony and descriptions provided are by professional and relatively revered experts and this is sufficient enough to exclude any identification. Anyone trying to take the middle position would accept that this was in fact some new species or subspecies of bat. But something that is unique to these specific claims is that this is clearly something that is suited to the fauna there and to the climate. One that has lived in small numbers far away from human industry and the effects of civilization. But one that was more of a derivative of the currently known bat species that had been able to grow to its size and achieve its supremacy simply from its isolation and its lack of predators and competition. So where does that leave us? Well, when we come to assess everything we know about the Ahool, what do you think is the most plausible or reasonable explanation for it? Also, ignore that voice crack. Given all the information that we have gone over so far, not to be too skeptical out of the gate, but let's lead with the fact that one of the largest subspecies of bat that is known in the modern age, the giant golden crowned flying fox, boasts a wingspan of above 5 feet. Impressive for a bat, no doubt. But big enough to be confused with a prehistoric pterosaur? Fairly unlikely. And the suggestion of a flying primate seems a little too bizarre and out of left field for even the most believing to accept. There has never been a reported instance or even something close to a flying primate, certainly not on the purported scale of the Ahool. Like, none of this has ever been discovered. There is I think a lemur that can glide, but lemurs are very small. So it's suggested on recorded human history that, there's just never been anything that has been found that if you're a primate, you would have wings. So the most likely explanation for the Ahool seems to be one that is the most boring and the most pedestrian. I know, it sucks. Despite the pedigree and the esteem of some of those that have reported it, there was at least some uncertainty even in these initial and foundational reports. There was a suggestion of misidentification, that the entire affair could have either just been a bat that was larger than usual, but of a known breed, or it could have just been an unusual or lesser spotted owl creating the signature cry. And certainly the sound of Ahool is not a million miles from how you would imagine an owl or to hoot or sound in general. So if it's like the dark of night and you're in the middle of a Java rainforest, you're gonna be kind of freaked out, I guess. Not freaked out, but it's, yeah, you know what I'm saying. So while there needs to be some consideration given to the tales and the legends of the locals and what they speak about when it comes to the Ahool and the beasts of its ilk, people also recognize that some legends tend to kind of grow in the retelling. The fisherman story, basically, a fish starts as like 2 inches, and about a year later, that fish is now a foot long. There's no doubt that the size, the scale, and the aggression of the Ahool will probably have been exaggerated during the retelling of this tale, and this might as well have influenced the way it was described. And it should also be noted that there have been a few serious sightings since the first few, though. Especially as the years roll on and we are now in the age where everyone has a camera in their pocket, it seems very unlikely that something as notable and striking as the Ahool would just disappear from view entirely. So there you have it, the story of the Ahool. As always, it's down to each of us to decide what we choose to believe about the tale. For some, it is nothing more than just proof that there is something well beyond our current understanding terrorizing the far forests of Indonesia. For others, it is an interesting novelty and a good story, but something that is quite rightly going to straddle the line between reality and fiction. And for the rest, it is nothing more than a case of a tall tale that has grown arms and legs in the interim since the first few encounters. One that has taken the natural location of Java and blown it up into something more than it could ever possibly be. Some people, hearing a big owl a century ago, that has turned into a story almost off its own. So I do want to break in here, as always, because I like being cracked out and I, talk in these videos. So basically, here's kind of something to consider, right? And it's variations in sizes of species. So if you take humanity, for instance, typically, at least in the United States, the average height is 5 feet 10 inches, or some people say 5 foot 9 inches, but that's about how tall the average male is going to be. Now, that doesn't mean everybody is 5 foot 9 or 5 foot 10. When I was in high school, I remember there was a kid who was quite literally 7 foot 1, I believe. Like, he was just ridiculous, and not just like me recollecting like, oh yeah, no, it was like a actual medical thing. Like, he was just taller. It was crazy than every single other person. So variations of heights and species can exist. Variations in sizes. I mean, what is the guy called? The Mountain from like Game of Thrones or whatever? That's just a big dude. And it can be like, well, that's because he eats. No, his skeleton is just bigger. His ability to pack on muscle is just a lot more than what could be considered from somebody else. So when you take into consideration how, hormone influences, certain types of food, you literally can have a bat, like let's say the bat with the 5 feet wingspan, If it's able to be a successful hunter and its genes hit just right, where it gets 2 copies of like the bat growth hormone gene, and it's just pumping that into its body, it could have a actual literal tumor mass on its pituitary gland that caused it to grow over time. You could have a bat that is much larger, and the reason that it was so rare and never sighted again is because it lived out its life and it just died. So variations do exist within species, and it can be significant as far as how different they look, what their size is, and possibly even aggression. I mean, if you are taking something like the pituitary gland and it is affected, you know, it could have more, if it's a male bat, could have more testosterone than usual, making it more aggressive because its entire endocrine system is completely out of whack. So it's not completely like ridiculous to think that something like this could have existed, and it could have, like, if you took a wingspan of 5 feet, that's gonna be pretty big. If you took a wingspan of 8 feet, you might kind of look at that and be like, oh yeah, it was around 10 feet. It's not really that large of a logical leap to kind of come to those conclusions. So if I had to say, could this thing have actually existed? Out of most of the cryptids we cover on this channel, I think this one literally could have existed, because it could just have been a genetic issue that it was suffering from that just made it larger than others. And it may have reproduced, it may not have reproduced, it may have just been one of those creatures that it got so big, maybe as it continued to grow, like when you have basically gigantism in humans. I'm totally blanking on the original word. Let me look that up. It's acromegaly. And essentially that's a hormone disorder that develops when your pituitary gland produces too much growth hormone during adulthood. And you can kind of think of acromegaly as like a secondary form of puberty. It changes your skulls, it changes your bones. Well, you don't have skulls, you have one skull, but it changes the human skulls, it changes our bones, it changes. Essentially, Robert Wadlow, I think he was like 8'6" or something like that. He had nerve issues because his nerves literally could not continue to be increased in length any further. So they were having issues communicating, which led to basically pins and needles and even just complete lack of sensation in some of his digits. But the point is that Robert Wadlow, being 8'11", obviously, we would not say that that is a standard height for humanity, but there he is. He was kind of a 1 in a million person, and we can now stop acromegaly from continuing because we know what causes it. So actually, when I was in EMT school, one of the other women that was there, her father experienced acromegaly, and she was telling me about it, and basically like his whole face changed, but they figured out what it was in time, so he had surgery so they could stop it from continuing. But that's the point. If you have gigantism in humans, you can have gigantism in bats, so who's to say that this thing didn't experience the same fate? But whatever you choose to believe and decide, that is up to you. For other tales and cryptids as well as mysteries, check out some of my other suggested videos. You should check them out, because Roanoke Tales, it's happening. We're going after the Dogman in 2027. But until next time, if you ever happen to hear a strange cry of the Ahool splitting the night, be sure to grab your camera phone before you head out to investigate, and then send me the picture so that I can post it. And obviously, you know, if you were to get this, you should probably get the credit. Like, don't send that to me. You be famous. Anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you guys enjoyed, then leaving a like would be great of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, all that good stuff in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the literal Wendigo tier, we have Grayson West, Michigan Dogman, Monkey Man, Not a Pickle, and Stupid Fox. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga and Dragon Master Knight. At the first-hand accounts tier, we have Pimp Daddy Shamrock and Yeeps. And at the second-hand accounts tier, we have Bianca, Fred Rush, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's support. It's never expected, but always appreciated. Thank you for keeping this channel alive, especially, I know I've taken breaks in the past, but we're doing it live. We're doing it for real. We're gonna continue uploading here 2 a week, so I hope you guys enjoy all that. But anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see everyone in the next one.